I'm going to take you back a couple weeks ago. Somebody called me and he said that his valves were not working on his Bach Stradivarius Trumpet, and he described the problem to me. My first thought was that it was one of the common problems on Bach Stradivarius Trumpets. What happens sometimes on Bach Stradivarius Trumpets is you push a valve down and then the valve will come up halfway and it will stop and then it will come up the rest of the way. And there is a very easy fix to that, and I thought that was probably what the problem was. So he sent the trumpet to me. After I got the trumpet in the mail, I opened up the box, I looked at the trumpet, and I was trying to figure out what was wrong with it. There were a few things that did not fit into the puzzle. I called the customer back up and I asked for a little more information, and what he told me was quite interesting. He said that he got it at an auction and the valves did not work, so he took it to a music store in the area and they actually replaced all 3 valves and did some other work to it. And then when he got it back, the valves still did not work, so he took it back to the music store and they tried to fix it again, and he got it back the second time, it still did not work. Then they ended up giving him most of his money back, and that is when he sent it to me. He also emailed me the invoice that he got from the music store that he took it to. Here's the invoice. I don't know how hard this is to read. I'm going to focus on the, let's see, they're writing right there. And I'm going to go over that with you. Pistons have been mushroomed out at the bottom, likely due to stuck slides. I think they mean stuck valves and not stuck slides, being driven out using improper tools. I think what they mean by that is somebody took a tool, and sometimes when valves get stuck in the casing, people try to get them out. And they try things like putting a screwdriver in the bottom, and then they'll hit the screwdriver with a hammer, and it will make a big mess out of the bottom of the valve. And what happens is sometimes the valves spread out at the bottom, and if that happens, the valves are in pretty bad shape. And sometimes you can fix it, sometimes you cannot. Since I did not see this before the valves were replaced, I do not know how bad they were and if they were fixable or not, but that is probably what happened to these valves. I know a lot of you are wondering how you would fix a valve that has been mushroomed out at the bottom. I would use one of these. It's called a ground valve sleeve, and they come from Furry's Tools. This one is 664 thousandths of an inch, which is the size for Bach Stradivarius valves. You would put that in there, then you would tap on it with a mallet, and you can tap pretty hard on that. What that would do is it would shrink the valve back down and make it round again. If that did not work, there is one more thing you can do. You use one of these sleeves, but you make a cut in it. I cut this with a hacksaw. What the cut in it does is it makes it so that it can shrink just a little bit. You would slide the valve in there, then you would tap on the bottom like that. What would happen is the vibrations from this, since this is steel and the valve is not as hard as this, the vibrations would start to shrink the bottom of the valve back into place so that it would be round again and the same size as it should be. I do not know if they did not try that. Maybe the valves were destroyed beyond repair. I'm not sure. But that is what I would usually do in a situation like that. And then it says, tool marks evident on bottom of casings. And that is right there. You can see that there are plier marks, and on the other side there are more plier marks there and there. Sometimes what people do when a valve cap gets stuck on an instrument, they will take a pliers and then use the pliers to take the valve cap off. That is not a good thing to do. It messes up the casings, and at best it leaves scratch marks on the casings, but sometimes it even goes into the casing and it shrinks the casing and pushes the metal in, and that can cause problems when you push the valve down. It will get stuck towards the bottom of the valve stroke. That was done by the owner of the trumpet before my customer bought the trumpet. The correct way to remove a stuck valve cap is with a soft jaw pliers. This removes them easily most of the time, and it has soft jaws, so it will do no damage if you're careful when you do it. Repair damaged pistons. I think they probably mean the casings and not the pistons because they replaced those. Reinstall improperly installed valve guides and springs. There's only one correct way to put in these valve guides and springs, and there are several incorrect ways. So probably the person who owned it before probably took it all apart and put it in the wrong way. That's what I'm guessing happened there. And we'll move on here. Where are we? Remove accessible dents in bell. It looks like there was a dent right here, and it looks like they did a pretty good job of getting that out, but you can never get a dent out perfectly, though. You can always see it at least a little bit. Remove stuck slides, oil valves, and grease slides. A lot of times tuning slides get stuck. That is very common, so it looks like they took care of that. This one says repair pistons. This one says replace pistons. So I'm not sure why they did some of this stuff twice, but it says 3 pistons, $74 each, $222. Fit replacement pistons. Remove accessible dents in bell, but it says that there also, so I'm not sure what's up with that. Remove stuck slides, oil valves, and grease slides, but it says that there too, but they charged for both things. They charged $200 for the first one and $372 for the second one. That is the evidence that I have so far. So using that evidence, I am going to try to repair these pistons and make them work like they should. When you have stuck valves on an instrument, you need to figure out what is the problem. Is it the valve, or is it the casing? Or is it both, the valve and the casing? I'm going to go back to the previous videos and show you what I did to try to figure that out. The first thing to do is clean off the valves. I do that with a rag made out of a t-shirt. And then I'm going to look at them and see if there's anything that looks wrong. Okay, that one looks okay. There is some wear right here where the valve is shiny. You may think that the valves are supposed to be shiny, but they're supposed to have more of a dull look like that. That's a proper looking valve. And when they get shiny, that means that something is rubbing against it. So I'm going to look for something inside of the casing when I look inside the casing. Here are the valves. He said that there's a problem with valves not going in the right way. So I'm going to try put them in. Yes, this is not going in well. Okay, I'm going to try it in the other slot and see what we have. Okay, it goes in, but it does not work. I'm going to switch this around. Here's the third valve. Okay, that does not go in easily either. Now I'm going to clean out the valves, and I have a flute cleaning rod with some cheesecloth on there, and I roll that around a few times and fold that over. I'm going to clean out the valves and see what it looks like after they're cleaned out. Yeah, I can see that I'm getting some junk on there. When there's a problem with valves, one thing I always do is take out the valves and the valve caps, hold it up to the light, and look through the valves and see what I can see. What I'm looking for is anything that's the way it's not supposed to be. There may be burrs inside of the casing where the metal was damaged, or there could be shiny spots inside of there. If there's a shiny spot, you know that the casing is pushing in and then the valve is rubbing against it. Or there may be some junk inside of there, but anything out of place, you look for it. I do see something on the second valve. There's a shiny spot right underneath where this brace connects the third valve to the second valve casings. Now keep looking. Okay, nothing else there. The next thing I'm going to look for is a problem with the casings. I see some marks right here. It looks like someone used the pliers to get off a valve cap. That may or may not cause a problem. And now I'm going to try the valves inside of the casings and see what I get. This is one of the casings with the plier marks on it, so I'm going to look for problems when I put the valve in that far. Okay, there are no problems with the plier marks. That's good. Okay, but it's starting to stick right around there. So again, I'm going to see where that is. Yeah, that's about right where the second valve slide is. I do not know if this is the problem, but I'm going to check to see if maybe the second valve slide was pushed in. And now I'm going to check the third valve. Okay, that's getting stuck right there towards the top. The valve is getting stuck when it goes about this far down, and what we have this far down is that brace, and that brace holds the second and third casings together. And I do not know if that is the problem, but I'm going to check that out. That was the first valve, and the first valve is the one that works. So now I'm going to try the other valves. This is valve number 3. That gets stuck in about the same place. I'm going to try the third valve in the second slot, and that seems to be getting stuck up a little bit higher than the first valve got stuck in there. And again, that is where those braces connect with the other valves. And then the third valve, I'm going to try in the first casing. Now the first casing was good. Okay, the third valve is having problems. So I know that there are problems with the second and third casing and the third valve so far. We still need to check the second valve. Okay, the second valve in the second slot. Okay, that goes down to where the valve slide is again. I'll try it in the third casing. Okay, that one goes in a little farther too. The first casing, I'm pushing these valves down very lightly. I do not want to put a lot of pressure and force anything where it does not want to go. So it is getting stuck about right here. But the first valve works, so there's probably not a problem with the casing. The problem is probably with the valve. Now we are back. That is what I originally did to figure out if it was the valve, the casing, or both. But knowing that all of the pistons were replaced, when they first got the instrument in at the other music store, probably both the valves and the casings were the problem. And those repairs are a lot harder to figure out. So I think they may have gone after the valves, but there are still some casing problems. And I also noticed that one of these valves may be bent. When you replace a valve, you need to fit that valve into its particular casing so that the piston matches the casing. I will show you how to do that later. But for right now, I'm going to check these pistons. Even though they're new, there may be a problem with them. Since the casings are probably also damaged, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the casing sleeve. I'm going to put the valves into there. See, that works fine. So there's probably nothing wrong with that valve. And then this is the third valve. Okay, that one is tight. It should not do that. I have to push kind of hard to get that in there. And then it starts to stick at the bottom. So I'm going to have to check out this valve because even though it's new, it seems to be there's a problem with it. So I'm going to put this one off to the side. We'll check the second valve. Okay, that one seems to be fine too. So back to the third valve. What I'm going to do with this valve is check to see if it is bent. And I'm going to do that with my jeweler's anvil. It is a piece of steel and it is very flat and it's polished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and roll it around on here and hold it up to the light and see if I can see any space in between the jeweler's anvil and the piston. I did a video on this a while back, so I'm going to leave a link in the description below, and if you're interested in seeing more about it, you can watch that video. So what I'm going to do is put this on the jeweler's anvil, hold it up to the light, and see if there are any gaps in between the jeweler's anvil and the piston, and yes, there are. Let's see here. There's a gap there. I'm going to rotate this. Looking at it this way, there's a gap on either end, so it rocks back and forth. Not very much, but it's going to be enough to cause a problem. So what I'm going to do is figure out exactly where it does that. And there's going to be a high spot and a low spot. That's the high spot there. So what I'm going to do, turn that around, put that into the casing. Let's see, this is the third valve, so I'll use the third casing right there. And take my rawhide mallet. You do not want to use a metal mallet to do this. And then I'm going to tap on the valve right there. If you tap on it right there, it will not damage the valve at all. If you hit elsewhere on it, you can damage the valve, and you do not want to do that, especially not on a new valve. So let's see what happened. Okay, it still rocks back and forth the same place. It looks like I did not do much to change anything, so I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to hit it a little bit harder this time. Still not too hard. You have to be very careful when you do this. It still rocks back and forth, so I'm going to keep doing that until the valve is straight. It is a few minutes and several taps of the valve later, and I got this to work, at least somewhat. It does kind of stop when it goes in, but it's in all the way. And remember that the casing may very well be damaged too, but when I put it in the valve sleeve, it goes right through it, no problem. So I'm thinking that the valve is good now. And the casing probably is the problem at this point, at least the third casing. The first valve worked fairly good the way it was, so I'm thinking we're down to the third casing and then the second casing and the second valve. So now I'm going to try to figure out what's wrong with this one. Okay, it does go in a little bit and then it sticks. So it does that with all of the casings. So let's see. If I go through this way, we still have a problem. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my 664 thousandths ground casing mandrel. I'm going to see how that works in the casings, especially the second casing. So I have my 664 thousandths mandrel, and that fits well into all of the casings with no problem. So I also got my 665 thousandths inch, which is 1/1000th of an inch larger. I'm just trying this to see if it goes in there or not. Okay, it goes in a little bit, not too much. On the first valve, it goes in most of the way. And I'm not forcing this one in. I do not want to damage the valves at all. I'm doing this to see if the casings may have gotten expanded or worn down over the years. Okay. So yeah, it goes in there a little bit, but not too much. Let's see, it goes in the third valve most of the way. Since the 664 goes in there with no problem, the 665 does not go in there all the way. That means that the casings are probably okay. So what I'm thinking is, since these valves are new, they probably just need to be fit into the casings. And the way you do that is you lap the valves into the casings so that each individual valve fits into the individual casing. When a company sells a new piston, they do not know which instrument it's going to go into, so they just sell the piston as it is, and the repair technician needs to fit it into a particular casing that it's going to be going into. And then the valve needs to work well after it's put into the casing. If the valve does not work well, then the job has not been done. So I am thinking that maybe all that needs to be done is these pistons need to be fit into the casing. And you do that using lapping compound. Lapping compound is kind of like, think of an extremely fine grit sandpaper, but it's like a paste, and you put it on the valve. And what it does is it fits the valve into a casing so that the casing matches the valve. I do not suggest using lapping compound for every repair. It should only be used when it is needed, and in this case it is needed. To get the valves ready to use the lapping compound, you need to take off the valve cap and also the spring and the valve guide. And then you put the valve stem back on. And I'm going to take the felt off too because the felt is going to get dirty if I left it on. And then put the finger button back on. Now I can work with the valve, and the valve guide is out of the way. The valve guide keeps the valve in straight and keeps it from going in too far, but I want to be able to control the valve, so that's why I took out the valve guide. The valve cap keeps the valve from going down too far, but I want the valve to be able to go down farther than it usually does when I lap it, so that comes off too. This is the lapping compound, and it's made by Freeze, and what you do is you take a little bit of the lapping compound and you put it on the face of the valve, all over the valve. This is my wooden assembly mandrel, and it looks like a table leg, but what it's for is holding the trumpet out in the open so I can work on it easier. Now I'm going to take one of the valves, this is number 3, and put it in there, like that. This valve is very tight, and that's to be expected because it has a lapping compound on it and the size is so close to begin with. And actually they give the valves to you just a tiny bit too large, and that's so that you can fit it with the casing. I also have a wooden dowel, and I'm going to use that to push the valve up from the bottom. And I'm going to work this valve up and down. And while I'm doing that, I am turning the valve a little bit. You probably cannot see me turn it, but I am turning it just a little bit each time. And then once I go all the way around and the valve is where it's supposed to be, I know it's where it's supposed to be when the number lines up to the front of the instrument. Okay, there. Now the number 3 is facing this way, and at least on Bach Stradivarius trumpets, the number 3 faces forward. Other instruments, it faces backwards. So now that it's lined up, I'm going to work it more in the position that it's going to be in, and I'm not going to turn it this time. I'm just going to go up and down. What that does is it works the valve the way it's going to be worked, with the extremely fine grit on it. And the grit, it does not dig into the casing. And when you think of the grit, don't think sandpaper. This is an extremely fine grit, so it's not really eating away at the valve very much. Okay, well, I've done that for probably long enough now. And that's the way it looks after you've lapped it for a little while. I'm cleaning the lapping compound off the valve. And now I'm going to clean inside the casing. And I'm going to test the valve now and see how it is. Okay, that seems to work pretty well. And the valve is tight in there, it's not loose, which is good. When you're doing this job, you do not want to take off too much of the metal, because if you take off metal either on the valve or inside the casing, the valves are going to get loose, and then air is going to leak out from the bottom of the piston, and that just makes the instrument sound stuffy and bad. So you want tight valves with no leaks, but the valve also needs to be able to go up and down. So I think this is going to be good. I'm going to clean off the lapping compound more. I'm going to put some oil on here and work it back and forth to clean that up better. But I'm going to do that after I have the other valves done. And now the second valve. I'll put that in there. Okay. If there's another problem like the slide being pushed into the casing or the braces dented into the casing or something like that, I would not lap it. I would fix it first. Originally, I thought there was a problem with one of those braces being pushed into the casing. After further inspection, though, I think the valve just needs to be lapped in. So I'm just lapping the valve in. If there was a problem, I would fix that first, though. I'm going to do the same thing with this piston. However, this is a lot tighter. I'm also going to go in through the bottom on this one. Because it is a little bit tighter, it'll be easier to work with. The valve is going in and out a little easier now, so I'm going to take it out of the bottom and put it back in the top. And then I'm going to continue like I did on the other valve by just spinning it around slowly. Now the valve is in the correct position, so I'm going to go up and down, not turning it this time. I'm going to go up and down for a while until it feels like it should be good. You know, actually, it's probably good about now. And this stuff, the lapping compound does have a heavy oil on it, so it's not going to work like a regular valve when you have the lapping compound. And that's why you need to clean the lapping compound off, put some regular valve oil on it to help clean it up, and then you can tell if the valve is working the way it should work. I'm cleaning up the lapping compound off the second valve, and then the second casing. And then I will try it. Let's see how it goes in there. Yeah, and that seems to work okay now. Now the real test is going to be how it works while the instrument is being played, but I think it's going to be okay now. And now the first valve. The first valve wasn't bad at all, so I'm going to be very careful not to take off too much on this one. I am probably just going to put the valve in the way it's supposed to be, although it seems to be a little more difficult. And then I'm going to in this one, I'm going to work up and down very lightly, only a few times, because if it's good, I do not want to take off too much metal. Okay, I think that's about it. I'm going to take that out. Let's see how this valve does. Okay, not quite like the other ones, but once I put oil on it and clean it up, it might work better. Okay, there, it's starting to work now. To clean up the valves more, I'm going to put some valve oil on there and work the valve in. This will help clean up all the remaining lapping compound on there. Then I'm going to wipe down the valve, and you can see right there that there's quite a bit of stuff left on there. And then I'm going to clean out the casing also. And I will see how it works. Okay, that's good. And I'm going to do that with the other two valves also. When you lap valves, lapping compound gets inside of the ports, so I cleaned those. Also, lapping compound can get inside the ports in the casings, so I take the slides out and clean those up. And that will help get some of the lapping compound out of there. Now, you cannot get all of it out. There will be a little bit left in there, but the Farise Ultra Smooth lapping compound is made to break down as you use it. So if there is a little bit left in there, over time as the trumpet is being used, the lapping compound will break down and it will just work its way out as the player oils the valves. I'm going to get inside the casings again because when I cleaned up inside the slides, that probably pushed a little bit more into the valves. Now the trumpet is ready to get put back together. Now I need to put the valves back together. The valve guide goes in first, and on Bach there is a small tab and a large tab. If you hold the number towards yourself, the large tab goes in from right to left like that. Then you turn it 90 degrees and it goes down. Then the spring goes in, and then the valve stem, and the felt, the valve cap, and then the finger button to hold everything together. This was an interesting project. It took a while to figure out what was wrong and how to fix it, but once I figured it out, it was actually a fairly easy repair. That's the reason why it's important to figure out what is wrong with the instrument, because diagnosing the problem can make fixing it a lot easier and save a lot of time and money when you go to repair it. Another thing you may notice on these valves is that they are not shiny. They have more of a matte or rough finish than a shiny finish, and that's the way they are supposed to look. If they're shiny, they actually do not work as well as if there is the rough type of look to it. I do not know exactly why it is that way, but that's the way it is. And when you lap a valve, it fits it into the casing, and it makes it work well. So that was the problem on this instrument, or at least that's what I think. But the ultimate test is when I put those valves in and play the instrument. Do the valves work well then? Actually, I'm going to correct myself. The ultimate test is not when I play it, do the valves work well, but when the customer plays it, do the valves work well. Because it's not fixed until the customer is happy with the repair that's done. And then the instrument is fixed.